procedural programming. It means that it mainly concentrates on procedure rather than the data. After getting the result of the sub-problems, once again the result has to be generated to the main program. What do you mean by this modularity? Modularity is nothing but dividing the large program into sub-program. Welcome back to one and all. Myself, Vasanta, lecturer in Computer Science, Vidhyaashram, Pre-University College, Temple of Excellence, Mysore. Today, we want to start with the first session of Object-Oriented Programming chapter. Whereas the total weightage of this chapter in the annual exam, only 2 marks, only in part B, only one question you will get. Like, what do you mean by class? What do you mean by object? What is the difference between procedural programming as well as object-oriented programming? Write the advantages, disadvantages as well as application. Like that, you will get questions from this chapter. Whereas on this session, you will come to know regarding what do you mean by procedural programming, structural programming, object-oriented programming as well as Hoops characteristics. Now, what do you mean by this procedural-oriented programming? Then what is the difference between procedural, object as well as structured programming? First, the name itself suggesting procedural programming. It means that it mainly concentrates on procedure rather than the data. But when they come on object-oriented programming concept, there it mainly concentrates on object rather than procedure. Whereas here, it depends on the procedure. What is the procedure? What is the first step? What is the second step? Like that, it follows. It will not go to concentrate finally what is the result I want to get. Whereas here, mainly concentrates on procedure. Whereas in procedural programming, it focuses on the processing of instruction in order to perform desired computation. For example, if I want to move from 4th floor to ground floor, on that time in procedural, first I have to reach first 3rd floor, then 2nd floor, then 1st floor, then later on ground floor. That is a procedure that you are following. Whereas, therefore, it highlights more than doing things like an algorithms. Mainly it concentrates on algorithms. And this programming is lengthy and it increases the complexity of the programming and it is very difficult to understand and modify the program here. Because already I told you it depends on the algorithm, procedure, steps. If I want to make some changes, then here it is very difficult here. Complexity will be more and here it increases the length of the program also. And this technique used in conventional programming language such as C as well as Pascal program. There we are using this procedural programming concept. Next, when we come on structured programming language. On that, it mainly here also it will solve the problem by using some technique majorly it will follows. Like in structured programming, approaches was a disciplined approach. In systematic manner, it will solve the equation which limits the branching to a small set of values well behaved construct. It means that it uses if statement, if else statement, while. By using that type of statement, here it will solve the problem. It is systematic manner, here it will solve the problem. Whereas the idea of top-down design is to break a large program into smaller program. Consider if I want to do any functions, then what I will do, I will divide that function into several parts. For example, I want to perform a marriage function. On that time, I will divide that work into several parts. One has to take care regarding card distribution, one has to take care regarding stage arrangement, and one more has to take care regarding food arrangement. Like that, I am dividing the large program into small unit, and then I am going to dividing sub-unit also once again. That is here in structured programming. The major drawback is that it is very difficult to model the real world scenarios using this model. The mainly here in structured programming, it follows top-down approach, dividing the large program into small unit and then solving the each unit. That is the main technique in structured programming. Here it follows. But when they come on object-oriented programming, there we are following bottom-up approach, whereas in structured programming, top-down approach we are following, whereas here bottom-up approach we are following. And here we are not concentrates on procedure, it mainly concentrates on data. Whereas in procedural, it concentrates on procedure rather than data. Whereas in object, it concentrates on object rather than the procedure. Object-oriented programming is a concept that combines both the data and the functions that operates on that data into single unit called as object. Here, it mainly concentrates on object rather than the procedure, and here it combines data as well as function into single unit. The object is an identifiable entity with some characteristics and behavior. Each object having their own characteristics and behavior, whereas object is a real-time entity which having some characteristics as well as behavior. Next, here in this object-oriented programming, top-down design is an approach of dividing a problem into sub-problem and then dividing the sub-problem further into still smaller sub-problems until it can be implemented for a computer solution. Consider we have one main problem that we are dividing into sub-problems. Once again, this sub-problem until we can able to solve, till that we are dividing it to some other sub-problem in top-down approach. Dividing the large problem into smaller unit and then once again dividing that smaller unit to some other sub-smaller unit. That is in top-down approaches. Whereas bottom-up design is vice versa. After getting the result of the sub-problems, once again the result has to be generated to the main program. Whereas in object-oriented programming, it concentrates on data rather than procedure, and here it follows the bottom-up approach. Bottom-up design is vice versa, where the solution to the smaller modules are then integrated to find the solution of overall problem. Whatever result we have generated, that once again it will transfer to higher order to get the final result. It just integrate all the things and then we are going to get the final result. Hoops follows bottom-up design technique. Next, when we come on object-oriented programming, there we are using the main concept called it as class. Then what do you mean by this class? Whereas class is a major concept that play a very important role, especially in object-oriented concept. Very important role in this technique. The class is a template that represent a group of objects which share common properties and relationship. For example, consider one mobile. On that mobile, we have data as well as function. The collection of related objects, that is related mobiles, can be called as class here. Consider here we have object 1, object 2, object 3. All the objects have data as well as function, data as well as function, data as well as functions. But each objects are interacting with each other by using the functions only. Consider we have mobile 1. In this mobile 1 we have data, that is nothing but contacts as well as functions. If I have only one mobile, then it can be called as object. Object is a real-time entity which having the data as well as functions. The collection of objects, for example, one more mobile we are going to consider. Here also we have data as well as functions. The collection of these type of objects which having same behavior and characteristics, then it can be called as class. Whereas a class is a collection of objects which having same characteristics and behavior. With the help of function only, all objects can able to interact with each other. When they come on Hoops characteristics, the first characteristic is modularity. abstraction, data encapsulation, inheritance, polymorphism, dynamic binding, as well as message passing. These are the major characteristics of hoops. Next, we'll come on modularity. What do you mean by this modularity? Modularity is nothing but dividing the large program into sub-program is called as modularity. Or once again, whatever sub-program we have, that program once again we are dividing into small unit. And that technique is called as modularity. Here see, consider I want to perform addition of two numbers. I want to perform addition of two numbers. First, what I will do the input work. That is A and B value I am going to give. A value as well as B value. Whereas in the next case, I am doing the calculation. That is C equals A plus B. I am doing the calculation. Once again, I am dividing that work. Display C value. That means whatever work I am having, that I am dividing into small unit. That is the word modularity. And that small units can be called as modules. Whereas modularity is a technique adopted to divide the complex problem into number of self-contained independent programming fragments is called as modularity. Just you have to think that modularity is nothing but dividing the large work into small unit is called as modularity, and small unit can be called as modules. Now is it clear? Next we will move on abstraction. What do you mean by this abstraction? Abstraction is an act which represents the essential features of an entity without including the explanation or any background details about it. It means that considering only the essential features without considering the background details. For example, mobile. Here we want to use WhatsApp, Bluetooth, incoming call, outgoing call, everything we want to use, but we are not bothered how exactly in the background it is working. For example, one more, bike, I want to ride the bike, but I am not bothered in the background how exactly it is arranged, which type of engine they are used, what is the technique they are following. That is nothing but data abstraction. Considering only the essential features. In the mobile, I want to use all the functionalities. For example, I am sending one message from mobile 1 to mobile 2. I am just sending the mobile contacts from one mobile to another mobile. But I am not bothered how exactly it is transferring. First, where it will store, how it is transferring the message. That is nothing but data abstraction. Considering only the essential features. Whichever features I want, only that feature I am considering. But I am not bothered in the background how exactly it is working. What is the technique they are following here. That is data abstraction. Next, data encapsulation. What do you mean by this encapsulation? Encapsulation is nothing but binding up of data and function into single unit is called as data encapsulation. Whereas already I told you in the mobile we have data members, that is what contacts, then member functions, set of operations. The combining of data as well as function into single unit is nothing but data encapsulation. Wrapping of data and function into single unit is called as data encapsulation. Next, we will move on inheritance. What do you mean by this inheritance? Inheritance is a process of acquiring the properties from base class to derived class. Or I can say that it is a process of creating a new class by using existing class. For example, consider the father has some properties. The properties are transferred to son. Here, whatever properties the father having, the same properties are transferred to son. With that, this son having additional properties also. Here, it is a process of creating a new one. Creating a new one by using existing one. The father is the existing one. Here, it is a process of acquiring the properties. This son acquired the properties from father. Is it no? That means inheritance is a process by which objects of one class acquire the properties of the objects of the another class. It is nothing but inheritance. In generally, we used to say heredity. Here, the son takes the properties, acquires the properties from father. Or I can say it's a process of creating a new one by using existing one. The process of deriving a new class from the existing class is called inheritance. When they come on types of inheritance, we have several types like single level inheritance, multi-level inheritance, multiple inheritance, hybrid inheritance, hierarchical inheritance, like that. We have several types of inheritance. Whereas inheritance is nothing but acquire the properties from base. This existing can be called as base. Acquiring the properties from base to derived class. New class can be called as derived class. Just taking the properties from base to derived is nothing but inheritance. Next we will move on polymorphism. What do you mean by this polymorphism? Polym is more than one. For example, if I am going to give 2 plus 3, then what is the answer? I am going to get 5. And one more function, Anu plus Shri. Then the result I am going to get Anushri. Anushri here, polymorphism, if you observe here, in both the case I use a plus operator only. But whereas here, it will perform addition of two numbers. Whereas here, it will not do addition, it is just concatenating, combining. Both Anu as well as Shri, both are combined here. It is the ability of this operator to behave more than one form. Whereas on this case, here it acts as a adding of two numbers. Whereas in this case, it will not add. On the place of add, it will combine the values. Whereas polym is more than one form. Polymorphism is the ability for a message to be processed in more than one form. More than one form, here it will behave. Next, we will move on dynamic binding. What exactly this dynamic binding? Binding is nothing but combining the small submodules into single one main module. Here, the binding means linking of procedure call to the code to be executed when it is called here, or I can say combining. Whereas dynamic binding means code of procedure call is known at the time of program execution. That is nothing but dynamic binding. And the next one, message passing. What do you mean by this message passing? Here, from one object to another object, we can able to pass the values, messages. That is message passing. Objects are invoking the function by the object by sending a message is known as message passing. Then from this class, what exactly you come to know? What do you mean by modularity? That is dividing the large program into small unit is nothing but modularity. Then abstraction, considering only the essential features without considering the background detail. Data encapsulation, combining data as well as function into single unit. Inheritance, it is a process of acquiring the properties from base class to derived class. The base class can be called as parent class or existing class, and derived class can be called as new class or a child class also we can say. Then polymorphism, it's the ability to behave a function or operator more than one form. Poly means more than one form. It is the ability of an operator or a function to behave more than one form. Whereas dynamic binding, combining all the modules. Message passing from one object to another object, we can able to pass the messages here. These are the major concept on this class. Whereas in the next class, you will come to know regarding what are the advantages of using hoops concept, then what are the disadvantages, then applications, where exactly this hoops concept are applied to solve a given problem. Then which are the major questions from this chapter you will get regarding that you will come to know in the next session. Thank you for all of you.